Hello.
Hey, Kelly.
Hi, this is Kelli and Necole.
Hey, Kelly, are y'all in the same location?
Yes. Would you like us to turn on video?
If you could, that would be great. All right, awesome. Awesome. I'm giving everybody an opportunity to log in.
Okay.
And we have, I'm assuming around 25 to possibly 30 folks that are supposed to log in. We also have one of the students is going to kind of, they came up with some questions as a class, and so chime in. I'm sorry, I have my stuff blocked, so y'all can't see me. There we go.
Can you send me Professor Ross?
I can.
And
once we get, I'm gonna mute everybody, Joan. So if you guys have questions, what I'm gonna ask you to do is send those to me via the side panel there. Y'all can actually hit chat for everyone that wants to ask questions once we get started. You can ask them via the chat feature here in front of your computer. I'd love to see some of y'all smiling faces. So for those of you that are on computers, please feel free to show us your face. I see Joan, I see LaTanya, I see Chris. Some of the others of you are hiding, so I'm sure our speakers would love to see you guys as well. So let's give it maybe about 2 more minutes, Kelly and Necole, and then we will get started.
And Kevin, this is LaTanya. Can you hear me? I just want to test my mic.
I can't hear you, yes.
Okay.
Hey, LaTanya.
Hey, friends. How are y'all?
Good.
And Cassie wasn't feeling well, so she won't be joining us tonight. So.
Okay.
Thank you.
You guys get to be our first lecture series via virtual Zoom, and so I just want to let you guys know y'all are pioneers in our program. We
like that.
My life is
yeah. So
we feel comfortable with that. We're comfortable.
Exactly. If you're in a comfortable space, feel free to go get the drink of your choice or whatever the case may be, and just in case you guys get thirsty while we're doing this. But I'm looking forward to this, and I can tell from our logins that we got quite a few students, so I'm excited about it as well.
Hey, Professor Ross, this is Alvin. Can you hear me?
I can't hear you, Alvin. Yes, we would love to see you, but I'm not hear you.
I tried to.
I see you. I see you.
For those
of you that have, unless you're in a place where you can't show, for those of you that have cameras, I'd love for you to turn them on. I know that makes it feel like I'm talking to people instead of names. So. Thank you, Tanya. Thank you, Asada. Chris.
Hello, Professor. My apologies. I'm on my iPhone at work, so this is Katrina.
Hey, Katrina. No problem. Hey,
Once
Christina.
I get to a place where I can get on the computer out.
That's fine. It's not a requirement. It's just always easier when we can see you guys. And I see Chris set up at the Northwest Center. Appreciate you, Chris. I see Dr. Eswick. This is so cool. All right. I am a believer in starting on time, especially when we have guests. Some of you that are in my class will probably say, you're a believer in starting on time. I want to thank you guys for joining us on our first virtual lecture series on community philanthropy. Dr. Thomas, or Professor Thomas, I should say, will be joining us, but joining us late. For those of you that don't know, she has kind of a big day tomorrow. And it's an important day, and hopefully she will have a victorious day tomorrow. She is running for election in District F in City of Houston, and had one last late meeting. So she plans to join us here momentarily. And she also had indicated that there's a student or students who had put together some questions. So if that student can identify themselves real quick, and if not, I have those questions. Of course, we'll get into discussion just in general, but I want to make sure that I identify that person is online. Is he or she online?
Yes.
And
Hi there. I'm Tucker. Are we on?
Yeah, we are.
Ms. Tucker, where are you?
Right here?
Oh, I see you. Hey, how are you doing? Okay. All right. All right. So what I wanted to do to start us off, before we get to you, Ms. Tucker, if you don't mind, I wanted to, instead of me rattling off bios and LinkedIn profiles and things of that nature, I wanted to give Kelli, Necole, and LaTanya an opportunity to introduce themselves. In each of your introductions, if you could just kind of tell your background, either educationally and professionally, and kind of how you got into philanthropy and development and things of that nature. So, Kelli, you want to start, or is that okay?
Sure.
All right.
Again, I'm Kelli King Jackson. My journey to philanthropy was accidental, like most people's journey to philanthropy. My mantra is that this is a made-up career, and so I sit with that and try to make it my own. I was working for Children's Defense Fund, so doing policy and advocacy work here in Texas, when the opportunity came for me to interview to join the foundation. It was off of a network. I had done Leadership Houston and stayed in touch with my cohort and was becoming friends with someone who was in philanthropy and had an opportunity to learn more about it. My role in philanthropy for a lot of foundations in Houston is unique because we get to maintain a community footprint. So I spend a lot of time out in the community trying to listen about community needs and try to bring that back to our grant making. I did my undergrad at NYU, New York University, and did my graduate studies at UCLA in Los Angeles. And what was the last question? Is that it? And I currently work for I currently work for the Simmons Foundation, and we are a regional grant maker. So we fund in Harris, Fort Bend, Galveston, and Montgomery counties. And really have an explicit lens around social justice, and I can answer questions about what that looks like for us at any time.
Okay, thank you.
My name is Necole, Necole Irvin, and how did I enter philanthropy? So I would agree with Kelli that most talk about their story as being accidental. Or happenstance, or really network driven. I think that when you speak with individuals that are maybe just entering that space, there's an increased number of people that are much more intentional, that have gone to school specifically in this space and area. Mm-hmm. I have been in the philanthropic space for over 20 years. And my first entry into it was prior to really understanding the world of organized philanthropy and private foundations. My first job in the sector was very similar to Kelli's story in that it was a network. I had just finished spending some time in DC as a lobbyist, and for family reasons moved back to Louisiana. And a really good friend from college who had been in the private foundation world for quite a while, said, "Have you thought about philanthropy?" And I hadn't. And and he connected me with a couple of folks to do informational interviews. And my first job as a senior program officer began in Mississippi, covering Mississippi, Louisiana, and Arkansas. So 3 states in the South with very similar footpaths. Over the last 20 plus years, I worked for multiple private foundations, usually local, and have had as well work experience with national funders. And I currently own my own philanthropic consulting firm here in Houston with a focus around Black philanthropy across the South and advancing the impact of that giving. I am originally from Louisiana, and I did my undergrad at Emory University and my graduate work, both a master's in public health and a law degree from Tulane.
Great, awesome. All right,
Hi.
LaTanya?
Yeah, thank you. I'm LaTanya Flix. I'm a native Houstonian, so unlike my 2 friends over there, a native Houstonian and 5th generation Texan, so I may be a bit of a unicorn on the call too, and proud of both of those. Mine was kind of a mixed match. I went into the social sector right after grad school, wanting to change the world and really do something meaningful. And so I started off my career working for 23 faith-based nonprofits that were all across the nation that were committed to community development. And they wanted to create a collective fund to fund community development. And at that time, that was really novel because there was no Office of White House faith-based initiatives. And faith-based community development was just in its infancy at that time. And early on in that process, I just began, there has to be a better way to connect people with resources to communities with needs. And the deeper you get into the work when you're on the side of the table of asking for money, you start to ask bigger questions. And so the more I did the work, the bigger the questions became. And so I just kept thinking maybe at some point I could be on the other side of the table, really helping people think more strategically about the way they give money away. And so I spent 23, we're not as young as the 3 of us look, but I spent probably when many of you were in grade school, but I spent 23 plus years on the other side of the table, really leading nonprofits as an executive director, operations, evaluation, capacity building, just about any position you could play in a nonprofit. I had played. And so I was last at the Women's Resource here in Houston. I was there for about 6 years as an executive director. And the Women's Resource teaches about 6,000 classes a year, financial literacy, free personal finance classes to low-income women and girls. And so I had a planned transition to leave there and to go into philanthropy full-time. I want to acknowledge Kelli and Necole because for a long time in philanthropy in Houston, to see Black and brown faces, you just didn't. I met Necole, kind of not really, but she was in a room once and I was like, oh, there she is, right? Like I heard about her, right? She was at one of the largest philanthropy here. And then Kelli soon followed, and I was a grantee, and I remember they had this meeting. It was one of their first kind of public community meetings. And I was so happy. I made it even scared, but I was like, hi, I'm LaTanya. Like, I was just so happy to see someone who looked like us. And so you probably know it from being in the field, but to know to have 3 African-American women on one call who've worked in philanthropy in Houston, that just was not the norm then. And there still aren't a lot of Black and brown faces in philanthropy. So all that to say, in 2014, made a transition to work in full-time philanthropy and went to the Community Foundation here, Greater Houston Community Foundation, with the plan to stay there for a few years so that I could officially say that I had sat in the seat of a grant maker, right? I had been asking for money. I've been working with families, corporations, family foundations, but had not sat in the seat of a grant maker. So went there in part for that reason, and also because I was a brown face in primarily white space. And so to build that cachet and into my resume, I went to the Community Foundation with the plan to launch my own practice. So like Necole, I have a practice, it's a social change advisory practice, and I help people with resources connect to needs. And that looks really different. Sometimes it might be board development for a nonprofit. Sometimes it might be a landscape scan in a community where the donor knows nothing about the community, but they want to give to that community. I go out and do that research. Have a passion around women, donors of color, and particularly Black giving in Houston. So August 28th, along with the help of Kelli and Necole and about 40 other people, we have launched a new initiative here in Houston called Black Philanthropy Houston. And we are in our infancy, but the whole point of that initiative is to inform, inspire, and connect Black givers with resources in Houston to think more strategically about how we give and to connect us to issues affecting Black communities in Houston. Went to Lamar High School, Trinity undergrad, Trinity University in San Antonio, and did my graduate studies at LBJ School at UT Austin. And I'm a Woodrow Wilson Fellow in Public Policy and International Affairs, which was a fellowship to increase the number of people of color in public policy careers, and did my summer institute at UC Berkeley.
Well, let me say this. I know Professor Thomas got an all-star panel just based on y'all's background, and that's before even the educational background, just based on what you've done in this space. So I'm going to let Ms. Tucker ask questions, and I'm just going to kind of play moderator. And for those of you that have just logged on before we get to Ms. Tucker, feel free to do two things. One, to show your face, because I'm sure our speakers would love to see who's talking to them. So for those of you that can do that, please consider doing that. And then secondly, feel free to message any other questions that you may have while they're answering their questions that have been put together by Professor Thomas's class. So we want this to be a free-flowing discussion, and then we'll unmute everybody maybe towards the end to just kind of ask some verbal questions, but want to kind of make sure that we got through some of the specific questions that Professor Thomas is. And I guess I should tell y'all who y'all are talking to. All my students know me, but my name is Kevin Riles. I'm the interim director of the Community Development Master's Program. I teach all the real estate development, real estate finance courses. I'm at my real estate office actually as we speak. So although I'm not I don't want to say I'm not a philanthropist because I cut checks, but this is not my space. This is Professor Thomas's space. So with that being said, I'll let Ms. Tucker, I'll unmute you and allow you to ask your first question. Can you hear me? There you go. Did you unmute? There you go.
You hear me?
Yes. I'm gonna do like the radio, turn your volume down.
Yes, we're right next to each other.
Gotcha, okay.
So these are questions that have been compiled by members of the class. And so I'll just kind of go through, and it would be helpful if each of you can answer some questions. If you want to pass to another person, that's perfectly fine. I have to put the disclaimer that my question is kind of lengthy. My apologies for that. But here's the first question. Knowing what you know now, what did you wish you had known when you first started?
That it was fake. I think when you write grants, and in my experience, a lot of people at nonprofits kind of fall into having to write grants to raise money. And so we don't necessarily get training at the beginning. Many of us didn't get training, or I can speak for myself. I didn't get training. I was like, they're like, oh, you're gonna work on this grant to fund your project so you can keep your job, right? And so my exposure to philanthropy, I just assumed it was this like highly structured, well-researched thing. And what I learned was it was largely rich people who put their money in different vehicles to give back into community, some for tax breaks, some for both tax breaks and to do goodwill, but each foundation does everything differently. And so I was looking for like the secret sauce when I went on this job interview, and I realized the mantra that our CEO says, if you've met one foundation, you've met one foundation. So there are no requirements by the IRS that we do our work a certain way. The requirements are more around percentage of money that goes out every year. And so a lot of times people are trying to understand philanthropy when they have to raise money, if we're talking about private philanthropy, and there is no code, which makes it really hard to raise money. She's not.
Anybody else on that, Necole and LaTanya?
I wish I had known how difficult change was. I think when you come into this work straight out of grad school, you were well-intentioned, earnest, committed to community, and not really understanding what it takes for social change to really be possible. You think if you have resources and well-intentioned people and community will, then that's a recipe for success. And it's that plus everything else. And I know that I didn't understand that in the beginning. And so learning that, I think I also thought smart, well-intentioned, you have all of those things, then certainly that's a recipe for success. I didn't realize that not having the cachet, not being from the right family, not having grown up in certain social circles would make my work as a fundraiser more difficult, right? Good values and well-intentioned heart are important and don't diminish that, but not having social cachet, if you will, not having been in the right club sometimes and in the right rooms, not having had a lot of corporate experience early on, did not play well for me because I hadn't been in some of those rooms and some of those spaces. And so the power of your own network and how to build it early on. LinkedIn, when it first came out, I was like, now what are people doing? You know, just not really understanding how to build a network for the cause that I was so committed to, right? Because this is a good cause people are naturally gonna give. And so that naivete is soon debunked the longer you stay in the field. And so how you need to build a professional network, not just for you professionally, but also for the cause that you were supporting through your social good, your organization, or through your philanthropy, were things I wish I had known earlier too.
So I'll briefly say I had never worked in development, and I'd never filled out a grant or seen a grant application prior to entering private philanthropy. And so I didn't have that expectation of assuming someone on the other side knew the answers or knew what they wanted to fund. But what I wish I knew at the early stages that I know now is in this sector, you're made to feel as if you are special and as if you are the only one, whether that's as a female, as a person of color, depending upon your expertise, whatever that thing is, you can easily buy into, I'm the person. When in reality, number one, you're not. And number two, you have so much power that if you don't exercise it to the fullest every day that you're in this space, you are losing and missing out. So I wish I'd known that at the very beginning.
It's interesting. So we talked about what you wish you had known in the beginning, but you guys have all been in this field for a significant amount of time now. So as a philanthropist, what are you consistently engaging in to ensure your legacy?
So you mean in our personal philanthropy or in our day jobs?
I'd like the perspective of both, actually.
Okay.
Or I should say that, but it wasn't my question. So I'm not sure if that's what the person intended, but.
I mean, I asked that because I think some of what LaTanya is doing right now is trying to help Black people think about their giving as being philanthropists, right? So we are one of the biggest communities of givers in the country, but Black people don't tend to think of themselves as philanthropists because we think about philanthropy as millionaires and billionaires and not about people, working class people, right? And you can count on your hands a number of people that you have put through school, donated to their tuition, whatever the thing is, kept somebody's lights on. That's what we do in our day jobs, and Black people do that every day, right? So how do we shift our paradigm and see our dollars as having power is a personal mission of mine, because we diminish our role in shaping culture and social change when we think that our dollars don't matter. And to a lot of nonprofits, having givers who can give $50 a month is a big deal. Having donors that can give $25 is a big deal because those givers add up. And so getting more Black folks to think about their giving, even if their dollar number is not big, is super important to me. So I give to a lot of different organizations. I try to give to Black-led groups. I prioritize that. I prioritize Black-led groups that have a social justice lens. Those are my personal values and how I do my giving. My lowest monthly gift is like 25, maybe my highest is 75. It varies, but I make an intentional commitment to do that monthly. Think about it, and they can count on that. and it means different things to different organizations. In my day job, I'm unapologetically Black. I'm advocating for Black-led groups. I'm trying to find more groups led by people of color. I'm trying to find more groups led by LGBTQ people. I'm trying to find more groups on the margins to make room, and as Necole said, flex my power in my philanthropy. So I think about philanthropy as always being about my legacy, which is a commitment to my values, both in my personal giving and in my day job.
Necole or LaTanya?
Sure. I don't know if I remember the question.
The legacy?
Oh, legacy, yes. So I'll answer from a personal perspective. I did not consider myself a philanthropist until maybe 15 years ago. And I am now much more intentional in naming that and owning it. But prior to that, I have a very long family history of givers. As Kelli mentioned, the enormous level of giving, particularly within the African American community, when you juxtaposition it next to how much we earn, is very significant. And so I grew up seeing both the giving in faith-based institutions, and for me it was the Baptist Church, and I should say missionary Baptist Church, so very specific. But it was also my mom giving of her time, giving of her expertise in really distinct ways, and acknowledging that. With that history, I really started shaping, once I was in the professional space of private philanthropy, of thinking about what my personal legacy would be. Many of the private foundations that I worked for did not allow me to sit on boards. And so I had to think about, what does my service, my giving look like beyond that? I've always done place-based work. And I had a belief that if I volunteer for an organization, you would see Necole, the program officer, and not Necole, the person. And seeing Necole, the program officer at organization X meant something. Now, that might be an outsized kind of set of ego or inflated set of beliefs about my influence, but that's where I was. And so while I worked in formal philanthropy, I did not sit on boards and I didn't volunteer. I did give money. I did give of my thoughts. But I would do it in a way that it was not acknowledged publicly. And for me, that was not helping to build my legacy. It was really hard for me, and I am still learning this. And that's acknowledging who I am beyond just saying I am a philanthropist. I'll give you an example. I recently brokered, so not in my day job, not with my company, but I just happened to be talking to someone and they said, we need X. And I was like, oh, I know about someone who has that. Let me connect the two of you. I connected them. So, right, providing this resource, they successfully moved forward in a relationship that meant benefit to the individual and the organization. And so when the resource giver said, did you hear, we made a decision and we're providing X. Did they acknowledge you? Did they say thank you? I was like, oh no, they didn't. Well, no big deal. And this person was like, no, it is a big deal. And if you are not acknowledging your value to this relationship, then you can't expect anyone else to. And it goes to this whole idea of, particularly when you have a set of skills, expertise, or as LaTanya said, network, professional network, how do you make sure that that's something that you're not giving away, that you're not valuing and you're giving away free? And so for me, as it's still a learning process, currently I'm intentional about where I serve. So I give my time and my expertise and experience in 3 specific places. I chair a national committee that's within my wheelhouse of healthcare. I sit on an executive board at the state level that's within a leadership organization. And then locally, much closer to my heart, I sit on a board around reproductive justice. So those are the ways that I am building my personal philanthropy, both in my community and across the nation.
LaTanya?
And I think the word legacy sometimes feels like the word philanthropy, like really, really big, right? Like my legacy, what will that be? And I would encourage you, wherever you are in this journey, to make that personal, to bring that in, just like we're trying to tell you to do with the term philanthropy, that the legacy isn't something that is big, that belongs to the wealthy. It's not exclusive, that each of us has a legacy that we can build and that we can bring. Personally and professionally, unlike Kelli and Necole, I've had a little more flexibility because I was not a funder much of my career. So as a nonprofit leader, my personal and professional were so closely intertwined. And a lot of my friends would tell me, you know, Tanya, you've been really fortunate to live most of your life being able to work where your values intersected with what you did on a daily basis. And so I didn't have some of those exclusions because I wasn't a funder. And when you are a funder, there's some things that you can't do. So I've been able to intertwine some of those in my work. And so I hope that the legacy that I am building, not that I'm leaving, that I'm building, is one of commitment, that I'm gonna stay the course. But also I hope it's one of evolution. And I hope that as students, you're thinking about this, that what I knew in 1994 is very different than what I know in 2019, right? And how I've been able to use that learning and leverage it and to pivot and to move differently and to think differently and to engage with people differently. And so I hope it's one of commitment. I hope it is a legacy that has been about service to causes greater than myself. I hope it is one about evolution and learning and how you can use that. And then I hope it's one that speaks to the lives and to the communities of Black folks, right? What we can do here in Houston, I think we have tremendous potential in the city. And so I hope that my legacy speaks to that. Like Kelli, I'm a giver like Necole and like so many of you. And in recent years, I've transitioned my giving. I am a Christian by faith. That's my faith tradition. And so much of my giving had always been to the church, right? Because I was taught that that's what you do. And so while I still do give in that way, I've been able to, if you will, diversify my philanthropic portfolio outside of religious and faith-based giving. And that has been extremely meaningful to me because when you work on this side of the table and the other side, you see where the gaps are. And so I could not in good faith continue to have giving structured only in one way, knowing what I knew. And so that's what I mean about evolutionary thinking. So as you learn more, allow yourself, if you will, to evolve in your thinking. And so much of my giving, still to faith-based, but it focuses around social justice, certainly, but causes, root causes. What are the issues that underlie the issues so that I don't give the symptoms? I try to find causes that address the roots of problems, justice-based giving, and then anything that helps people to enter the economic mainstream, right? So that people are self-sufficient and not reliant on systems and programs. So that's kind of where I focus, and hopefully that too will be a part of my legacy.
So before we get to the next question, Ms. Tucker, I wanted to take a pause for those of you that are on mute to see if we have any questions, instead of doing all of them at the end, if we have any questions that you guys want to ask our panelists. And if you do, just unmute and you can go ahead and ask. And if not, then we can kind of continue with the questions. But I want to give everybody an opportunity to ask a question. You can unmute and ask and kind of drive the discussion a little bit.
Okay, I have a question.
And please state your name and who you are. I know who you are, but they don't. So.
Exante Wallace. Sorry, I turned my video off because every time I turn my video on, the screen was going in and out, whatnot. Bad Wi-Fi here at Prairie. And y'all was going out a little bit, in and out a little bit because of my Wi-Fi. Hey, we're still working out.
Thank you. Okay, great. And as well.
So, Kelly, you said Black Leg organization, correct?
Mm-hmm.
What's a Black Leg organization?
Oh, good question. So I define a Black led organization where the senior leadership of the organization is Black. So that's usually your CEO, your executive director. And I also look for organizations that have Black folks on their board, which help hold the leadership accountable and are responsible for the running, that the organization is in good health.
Okay, so Black led organization, one of the top of the organization is Black. Okay, I just want a clarification on that.
Yes. In Houston, many of our nonprofits who are kind of getting mainstream funding are not led by people of color. And so I'm on a mission to change that.
Oh, you said Black led.
Yes, LED.
Oh, my fault. I thought you were saying leg.
Oh,
my fault. All right, that makes sense.
Zonta, you can turn your video back off.
Yes, sir. See y'all later.
Anybody else with questions?
I have a question.
Hey, Professor.
All right, Michelle and then Alvin. Michelle.
My question is for LaTanya. You said that you diversified your giving from the Black church solely to other organizations that you saw a need in. Do you feel like the Black church isn't doing enough with the donations that they get, or do you wish that they would?
You done hit a button, Michelle. I don't see heads shaking already.
Oh, Sister Michelle. So trying to be true to the tenor of the class. So remember, I started my career working for 23 churches. And so I think my perspective is one that's certainly from the inside out. And I'm the granddaughter of a Pentecostal minister and a long line of church leaders. So that is the context and the frame for my decision-making and also these comments. I think there are a couple of things, and I heard Tony Penn at Rice say it recently. There was a Breakfast Club conversation about the Black church and what are the opportunities there. And sometimes I think we ask the church to do things that they're just not qualified to do. Right? And so I think one thing that we know about Black churches is that there's tremendous social capital. It is a place where people gather. It is a place where information can be given and taken back. It is a place where you find community. It is a place where you can find safety. It is a place where you can find people with shared interests. For all of those things, I think the Black church is certainly a viable institution. But when it comes to perhaps leading collaborative social change that integrates other folks, being the party responsible for that kind of leadership, the Black church may or may not be best positioned for some of those kinds of things. I think it depends on the type of change you seek. I think it depends on how the Black church is positioned, but to solely look at the church and say, you are the orbit in the beginning and the genesis, if you will, for social change in Black communities, I think it is an unfair burden, and I also think it is one that they cannot carry. But every church is different, right? So just like if you've seen one foundation, I would say you've also sometimes seen one Black church. And so I think there are opportunities there, and there are many things that the Black church does unique and still serves a unique role in Black communities, because there are churches that are mission focused. There are churches that just paid off debt. Kelly's probably gonna talk about it in a minute. She's a part of a unique congregation here, right? And so I say that on one hand, and I hope what we can do is hold the tension, right? That on one hand, it may not be the best place, and then sometimes it is the place for certain things. But I think what we had when we had the edifice movement in early 60s and revolution and base building, that the church largely does not play that role anymore. And then my master's thesis is also on the role of the Black church. There's a revival going on. And so this is all in context, if you will. Yeah. Toss it to Kelly.
We're gonna have you back.
Thank you.
This analysis.
I don't want no communion wafers thrown at me.
So before Kelly speaks to her unique position, I just want to say that from a learning perspective, I think that it's really important that whatever role faith plays in your life, whether that is a occasional collection offering, or it is a very intentional commitment to tithes and offering, or if it's even more than that. I think that as an intentional and active giver, as a philanthropist in your community, there are some responsibilities that go with that giving. And so I would encourage you to think about your faith-based institution and ask questions about what is going on with the dollars. Where are they being invested? How are they being used? Those are all appropriate questions that should be a part of your life.
So I'm the heathen in my family. So I also am a PK, multi-generations back, and I, in my own personal faith, because, you know, Black people are passionate about the church, and it's something that you're not supposed to talk about. And I got really frustrated seeing that in all these philanthropic studies, the number one places Black people were giving their money was the church, but the Black community still wasn't quite making it, right? And so really started looking at my tithe in a holistic way. So my tithe, my 10% of my giving includes my faith-based giving and my community giving. Right. And my expectation from my faith community is that you have a presence in my community. Right. And so LaTanya is referencing, I go to a progressive church here in Houston led by a Black woman. And we recently sold a building, and we tied a portion of that building and endowed some scholarships. One of those scholarships was to Houston Tillotson at HBCU. And that is, to me, walking out our values. Right. So we didn't just take the money to build something else or to make our church bigger or better, but it was to be deeply rooted in community, which is what we say that we value. And I think that for a lot of us as Black people, we were taught, like, you don't question what the church does with its money. Your job is to give the money. And so my generation and younger, my children's generation, they're like, no, I got questions though. Like, I want to know, I want to understand. And so how do we hold space for that and still honor, like, my faith is deeply important to me, and my giving and my faith community must align to those values as well.
What church is that, Kelli?
I go to Bethel UCC, and I will tell you the UCC denomination, there's a very Afrocentric UCC church in Chicago that recently was in the news for writing off medical debt of people in Chicago.
Otis Moss is a pastor.
Yes, and if you don't know Otis Moss, I'm gonna need you to run and Google that. But I think that awesome. Those are examples to me of what Black communities need from their faith leaders in this time.
Alvin, you had a question?
I have a question.
Yeah, quick.
Alvin first, and then Christina. Go
ahead. First, thank you guys all. Can you guys hear me? All right, perfect. Thank you guys all for speaking on the call. A lot of great things already. Kind of going to stay on the same path with the Black church and the role of faith and where that plays. I know, don't look crazy. It's not a crazy question, but do you guys find that? And first, I want to make sure I heard you correctly when it came to expanding your philanthropic network. That a part of expanding your philanthropic network included maybe not giving in secret, but also giving openly. If I heard you correctly, and then does that, going back to the Black church role tradition, I'm not one to quote the word. I do not know the word like that, just disclaimer, but I think as Black folk, we hear in the word that you should give in secret, and the Lord will reward you when open. And so do you find that can, those traditions that we have and that are in the word can sometimes put us at a disadvantage when it comes to expanding our philanthropic network? And again, I want to make sure I heard you correctly related to that.
Absolutely. I mean, I feel there's such a thing as positive peer pressure in my mind, right? So we look to entertainers and public figures to talk about all kinds of things, but for whatever reason, we don't want to ask questions about their philanthropy. And I don't understand that. Like, I want to know the whole being. And so I think that, yes, I think we hide behind that in the people who are of faith, and we hide behind and we can't talk about our giving. But I don't talk about my giving to boast. I talk about my giving to influence others to also give, right? So I think it's more about your motivation and your intention. But that's my faith
I also think, so there's two things I would mention here. Number one, if you believe that you should give in secret, that still does not stop you from asking questions about its usage, right? So if your church has a prison ministry, what's the goal? What's the purpose? How are these dollars being expended for the benefit of those incarcerated? I agree with Kelli in that I think that we do not value our influence enough. And so I might be someone who might not say this is how much I give, but I will say, well, I've made a decision to put a percentage of my giving in the church to foreign missionary work because our church values water and what it means to have potable water in communities and how that impacts young girls being able to go to school.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So that's using and talking about to your congregants, to your fellow faith givers, information and an understanding about the value you place on water, the value you place on education for young girls, right? So there's that range of opportunity in faith giving. And then finally, I said two, but finally, the third thing I'll say is many times I agree we do hide behind the secrecy, the privacy, but without that, there's difficulty in connecting and being able to truly leverage your opportunities of giving, right? So how are you able to leverage your opportunities of where you're choosing your board service and talking about that at your job in the classroom, if you are being secretive about where those dollars are going and why?
And I would offer and always talk about the multiplier effect of giving. And so when I elevate, when I speak to, and usually my conversations are about causes or issues or end results or root, some of the things that I'm passionate about. But I can't think of a time when I've ever led with last week, you know what I gave? Like, it doesn't lead that way. It's usually about the issue, about the cause, about the end goal that I seek. And that's how those conversations, and I believe those conversations have multiplier effects. And it's really about seeing good work and seeing the ripple of that and encouraging people to get in. And we can't do that, and we can't do that in silence.
Christina?
Okay, so what impact have you guys as like family, like your mothers and fathers, grandfathers, cousins, uncles, what impact have they had on you guys as far as being philanthropists? Like when you were younger and you were being raised by them, like what impact did they have on you that still kind of lingers today?
I would say total. I spent summers with my grandparents in South Texas, and so to watch their lives certainly influences what I do and the way that I do it. I had two role models in my house who talked about, one would tell me to always do my best, and the other said that the world should be better because I was here. My father said people should know that I lived because of what I did. And so those things resonate with me on a daily basis.
Yeah, I think Necole, sometimes when she does a workshop, will ask, like, what's your first giving memory? And mine was at church. It was that little cardboard little book thing. You had to collect the quarters, right? And I was so proud when I filled up my little book of quarters and turned it in, right? Like I had written, and I think that to me, that's the feeling I get when I give, right? It doesn't have to be a lot of money. I feel like I've contributed to something bigger. So I think that to LaTanya's point, it was always modeled to me. My family didn't have, some of my family didn't have a lot of money. I do have some family with a lot of money, but my nuclear family, we didn't have a lot of money, but my mom is always doing something for somebody, always trying to help somebody, always trying to support somebody. And so I think that it gets instilled in your children when they see that. And that is my goal. I have 2 young adult children, and my goal is for them to see me give, and that they are now going to be givers as well.
One of my most deep points of value from a family legacy perspective is something that I didn't learn really at a young age. I learned after I was in high school. So I had some already formed thoughts and ideas. But what I learned was my family was one of 3 that moved into the town where I was born. And they were very intentional in that movement. These 3 families purchased land, and they gave a portion back to the state for a school, and they gave a portion to the community for a church. So I grew up in a family church surrounded by family. And that was my norm. And it wasn't until high school that I even thought that was weird or different or unique. And then really in college that I really began to understand how unusual that scenario was. But this idea that community was bigger than just my family is truly what I build, is the foundation of my giving.
Thank you, guys. So I'm going to go give it back to Ms. Tucker so she can ask any. We do have actually, before you do that, we have a question that came up on the chat. Chris asked, he said that he read somewhere that disaster philanthropy has a long way to go. Can you all speak to disaster philanthropy as it relates to Black communities, especially considering Katrina, Harvey, etc.?
Yeah, I guess I probably have the longest
Chris is
footprint.
probably not African-American on this call, but he asked the question, so I appreciate it.
Hi, Chris. So I have been involved in disaster in a couple different ways. When I was at Children's Defense Fund, we were on the receiving end of the funding related to Hurricane Katrina. And then for the past 2 disasters locally, I have served on the grants committee for the funds that the different county judges and the mayor have fundraised for. So I've been a part of that grant making. I think that disaster philanthropy is an evolving space, and yet equity is a challenge. I think that the discussion about most impacted communities, I think discussions in Houston about renters and how renters are centered in the work and get access to resources that are largely available for the owners of multifamily structures or the owners of homes is still an issue in our community. I think that Houston in general has underinvested in Black-led organizations. And so when a disaster comes and the competition is fierce, they're not always well-resourced to participate in that, right? So I always see it as my responsibility in those spaces to advocate for those groups, to have a seat at the table. But one of the things I've learned is that when a disaster hits a community, they are worse off after, even with recovery dollars, right? So if we were already struggling, after each disaster, we just get further and further behind. And so how do we tell that story in such a way that we right-size how we give that money out and really have influence over that is a new body of work that I'm trying to figure out, like, how do I lean in and flex in a way that helps our community?
I will say I first really was in the midst of disaster funding during Katrina and Rita. And I was in Mississippi, but funding in Mississippi, Louisiana, and Arkansas. And the difference specifically between Mississippi and Louisiana really was about how government operated. And I think sometimes we don't think about the interrelationship between public dollars and private dollars. We don't think about the difference in funding for disaster, recovery, and resilience, right? There are multiple phases that happen when, particularly from a nature perspective, disaster occurs. We also don't think about our timeline or the trajectory of the work that will happen. When Katrina and Rita happened, people said this is a 15-year event. And that is hard to wrap your mind around when you're in the midst of it. It truly is. And so just briefly to go back to this, why it's important of how governments operate. In Louisiana, both Louisiana and Mississippi are red states and have been for at least a generation. Mississippi is a centralized state, which meant all public dollars and most of the private dollars flowed through the government, the governor's office, the governor's mansion, and then went from there. In Louisiana, you would think the same thing happened, except Louisiana had a strong community foundation in New Orleans and Baton Rouge. And so that meant there were people on the ground who knew community, who understood the philanthropic world, who could operate in a different fashion and bring some different models to the conversation. New Orleans was also a different animal in that it had all of the media outlets. And so people learned more about what was happening on the ground in New Orleans than they ever did about the Mississippi Gulf Coast. And the mayor of New Orleans was accustomed to operating directly with the federal government. So money flowed through city as opposed to through state and down to city. So again, there are multiple levels that impact the dollar actually getting to the person that needs it.
LaTanya, you want to add anything to that, or no? Okay. All right, Ms. Tucker, I'll let you take back since I kind of rolled over your questions.
No worries. We've got tons of them. So anytime you need to interrupt, that's fine.
By the way, everybody, for the millennials out here, in church, there used to be it was brown. There's a little envelope like this. I know some of y'all don't know what I'm talking about. I'm a PK. I grew up in the church. And you would open it up and it would have different little slots for quarters or whatever you were going to put in there. And I think it might total to $5 or $10 or whatever when you filled it up. So that's what Kelli was talking about. I just wanted to I don't have one in my office, but wanted to give a visual that you would do this, you would help. And she was very proud when she put all those quarters in those slots. So amen and tabernacle. All right, here we go. Ms. Tucker.
Okay, and sticking with that, let me ask this question. What challenges have you faced in connecting Generation Z in your fundraising efforts for your causes?
So you want to start with
LaTanya?
We'll start with that one?
Yeah, so we know that there are certainly differences across the generation. Caveat, most philanthropic research, while it does pull in communities of color, most of the research primarily focuses on white donors, but there are studies where we are present. And so we know that for boomers, more traditional causes and more mainline causes, right? And that once you are over 65, you're typically pretty entrenched and deeply committed to a cause. It doesn't mean that you can't change your mind or that you won't, but you're less likely to. We know that after that, X's and Y's, we are more open, more interested in learning. But when you think about millennials, what we know about them is that they want to see impact. There hasn't been as much research done on this Xennial and Z's just because they are so young. So I can speak more to millennials than those that come behind it. But if past is prologue, I think that these Xennials, Z's, and all the other letters that are coming will be similar to millennials in this regard, and that they want to see impact. So millennial, as many of you know on the call, will see a cause thousands of miles away on the globe somewhere and be ready to give to that cause because they feel a sense of connection to it, because they can see immediate results, and it's something that resonates with their core values. We also know that millennials are the generation of the nones, N-O-N-E-S, that don't have a faith connection. And I'm not trying to beat a dead horse, but I'm just talking about the data. And so they don't see faith as the institution or the most viable to create social change. So you have a whole generation that is largely unchurched and that does not espouse a faith connection necessarily. Does not mean that they are not spiritual people or people with spiritual practice, but they don't espouse one faith tradition. The other thing we know about millennials is that they're very interested in impact investing, and we also see that with X and Y. So impact investing, knowing what you own, what's in your portfolio, and your ability to create a financial return from yourself, but also to have to do good by doing well, and ESG, which is environmental, sustainable, and governance. So ESG goals, big goals, that you can accomplish those goals and also have a financial return. So a younger generation looks for impact investing as well. I think some other places where you might want to question and think about differences is gender as opposed to generation. So you have generational differences, and then you have gender differences within each of those generations as well. So that's something else to think about. So X and Z I can't comment on as much just because we don't know as much, but if past this prologue, they will be much like this generation and wanting to see and touch, and they also want to engage. So I don't want to just send you a check as a young giver. I want to come and I want to volunteer. I want to feel the work. I want to put my hands on it. And it doesn't mean that older generations did not, but this generation certainly wants to be much more actively engaged and to know. We also know about all the technology, and it probably goes without saying, but this generation is keen on using technology. Whereas if you talk to my father, I'll say, Daddy, call the XYZ. Tanya, I can't call him, I'm gonna go over there. So he goes everywhere. He goes to the post office to mail his mail because he says you can't put it in the blue boxes because people may not pick it up. He's 76. I've gone to the post office when my dad still lived here and would see him at the post office. I was like, why? I got to bring my mail, right? So older generations are very much committed to the ways in which they gave early on, whereas a newer generation will give on an app, a donation screen, cause of fundraising, crowdsourcing, much more open to that than you see with older generations. And a part of it might be skepticism, but I think it is less about skepticism than doing what I have always done is what some of the data tells us. Kelli, Necole?
The only thing I would add is that there's also a difference generationally with commitment to a single organization. There are many individuals who are my age or older who have given to the same organization for the last 20 years and will give to that organization for the next 20 years. Sometimes with questions and sometimes without. Sometimes with a demonstrated impact of the organization, many times without. But there is that comfort in giving, and there is the seeing that as a part of their legacy. I have not seen evidence of that in both millennials and younger. That if my perspective, my lens is social justice, that might look like a bail bonds fund today, and it might be water in South America tomorrow, and it might mean an environmental issue around dumping in Asia next month.
Whereas your older donor, the grandparent of that younger donor, is still giving to XYZ charity, the mainstream, the bigger group that they've always given to.
Yeah.
And I just would add that, some of what I think Necole can add context to, if we have time later, is that some of the pitfall in Black giving is generationally, we have folks who will give to institutions that are historic Black institutions who may no longer be serving community well, and will just continue to passively give to those organizations as a part of their legacy, but it's not an organization that is currently effective with those who actually need the services. And how do we sit with that as Black people to say, Daddy, I know you love X organization, but what we're hearing in the community and what folks need, Daddy, is not that. Now, Daddy may still give to that, and you can't, stop Daddy from doing that, but at least for us to be able to have those conversations, I call that family business conversations, so that there's just a level of awareness and that we at least are accountable for where we're giving our dollars.
Okay, another question. Some philanthropists
I think we lost you.
Uh-oh, you froze.
Froze.
Oh, no. Okay. Am I back?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Some philanthropists tend to talk about their successes and what they've done. But what are some of the common mistakes philanthropists make, and how can we avoid them in the future as future philanthropists?
We make mistakes all the time. We just I say we have no risk in our jobs. Philanthropists like to say, "Oh, we don't want to make a risky investment." But I tell you all the time, I've never recommended a grant that didn't work out and thought I was going to lose my job. Right? So the myth of risk is not really real. But I do think that mistakes often are when one that I learned I was doing was putting more pressure. I don't know if pressure is the right word. Expecting smaller grassroots groups to present like bigger mainstream groups. And when your budget is 200,000 against someone's budget who's 20 million, that's not a fair comparison. So I think a big mistake was not giving smaller groups earlier in my career a better shot to really understand the local context in which they were working. And if I had to do it over, I think I would scrutinize the larger groups more, but what I think I was really doing was scrutinizing the smaller groups.
I think there's some level of assumption, right, that's in that. You assume that a larger organization has the capacity, have the internal controls, have the all of the things that will make them successful in what they are saying they're going to do. I think that a level of assumption is also true with individual philanthropists. We assume, whether it's based on the reputation or the branding or the piece of material that we've received or the amazing photo and the tagline, that their impact equals what we've been presented. And we do not delve deeper. We do not ask the questions of when, what is the role that your board plays in a strategy? What kind of control does your leadership have? Does your leadership, both at the senior level and across the board at the managerial level, reflect the clients that you serve? Who are the clients that you serve? What is your impact on an individual basis with folks that walk in your door, right? So I think that is, I would say, one of the common mistakes. And even at the level of when you write your check or you sign your credit card thingy, I'm blanking right now, sorry about that, of your gift for the gala or the luncheon, those dollars, we usually don't follow those up, right? How are those funds being used? Did they have an event that actually cost more than what they raised? So were your funds actually going for the party and not the cause? So yeah, I'll leave that there, because we are social givers, Black folk, especially Black folk in the South.
And I would echo, all folks are social givers, but for us, our social giving has a greater impact because we're dealing with a smaller base of gifts from the beginning, right? So if much of that is social giving and not impact giving, then we suffer disproportionately even more. I think one thing is this whole notion of effectiveness and impact, right? At one point, we just gave and gave and gave and we didn't have it. And then I think the field leaned so heavily into impact and wanting to be able to measure everything. And so Parker Palmer says something about effectiveness. He says that if effectiveness is the only measure, then what happens is we become wedded to smaller and smaller things because it has to be something measurable. So as you're thinking about impact and designing programs or talking to people about nonprofits and what they do, that if it's something that we can measure, systems change doesn't often feel measurable. So when we talk about a criminal justice system and changing that system, that is not in the sense that we would say, well, there are going to be 5 of these, 6 of these, and 7 of these at the end. And so when we're so tied to numbers and outputs and measurable things only, we sometimes lose sight of bigger problems that we could actually try to solve. So that's something to keep in mind. And I think the other thing is this notion of what's transactional, something that a small nonprofit could benefit from. Maybe it's a small technology innovation, or having the executive director use something like a Calendly app to schedule their meetings because they don't have an assistant. That seems really small. And so as you, as someone who's a funder, might say, well, or if you're supporting the organization, that's not going to help y'all reach kids. But if that small transactional change, it could be transformational for that organization. For the 20 million organization with a staff of 50, having an app to schedule meetings won't necessarily be that helpful. So keep in mind scale sometimes when you think about change, and what helps one organization in great ways could be insignificant to another. But it doesn't mean that the change itself isn't merited, right? So just keep that in mind.
So let me ask a question real quick. So you touched on the Black church. And so I have this concern theory about all of our legacy African-American organizations. And that spans from church to NAACP to Urban League to the sister, whatever the deal is. And it seems there are a couple of issues with our legacy organizations, and I would put in general the Black church in that category. I grew up AME and go to a Baptist church now, and a lot of our legacy, especially civil rights-based organizations, are getting older, both in age of organization and age of participation. And so these old methodologies of fundraising and philanthropy are being challenged by some of the things that you guys have just mentioned, LaTanya, Kelli, Necole, as pertains to millennials and how they give and what they want to see. There's a whole nother leadership. I teach leadership this semester. There's a whole nother leadership answer to this as far as how African-American leadership, legacy leadership, and legacy leadership thought versus leading and trying to grow and sustain these organizations. But from a funding / ongoing operations, it seems as though all of our legacy organizations have had and are having funding issues ongoing to meet basic operations. After years, some close to 100 years of runway as far as running. And so my question to you is, what have you seen out there from new ways or entrepreneurial ways for these legacy organizations to possibly gain funding, and are they open to them? And I know that's a broad question, and I'm putting a lot of our organizations.
You're trying to get us put out the Black People Club.
It's a concern because I run into it. I actually, in my commercial real estate business, sell and help faith-based organizations and nonprofits sell and buy real estate. And so I run into it a lot when I'm in the room with the trustees and we're about to sell or about to buy something. And, as my pastor says, you can only have so many chicken dinner sales. So, and millennials, Generation X, which is me, aren't buying them. So I have a concern for all of this institutional knowledge being gone because we can't fund these organizations to keep moving forward.
I mean, there are layers upon layers. I think for me, a big issue is leadership. And the way that I've come to understand it now is I'm almost calling it like hoarding power, that there is not a succession plan. And when you even try to talk succession, it is like I'm trying to put you out of your job. But you can, if you're the organization leader for 50 years and you don't have a succession plan, so when you go to the light, what's going to happen to your organization? Because donors follow leaders, right? So if you have not planned for succession within your organization and built up and put those leaders out front so donors are familiar with them and comfortable with them, when you gone, the money is gone. And I see that a lot in some of our organizations. I think the other is we've always done it this way, and this is how we're going to do it. And what I know about young people is young people vote with their feet, right? So if young people, they'll try to influence change, they'll try to get leadership opportunities, and at some point they walk away and they go start their own thing. And so what we then have is anchor institutions that have, you know, the elite Black folks who are going to give to them no matter what. And then you have these new burgeoning groups who are trying to try new things and test new innovations, who are trying to figure out how to get different pots of money. But these folks over here are your donors are transitioning, right? And so I think we have to think about a holistic strategy as a Black community, and really be willing to have some of those conversations, because philanthropy is different than it used to be. It's more professional philanthropy than family philanthropy in many communities, or it's right sizing, where family philanthropy is engaging with professional staff who have a different level of knowledge and expertise, and the questions that they're expecting, that they're asking, and the answers that they're looking for. If our anchor institutions can't give those, then that other money begins to dry up, and we see it in the sector as well.
And I would say that younger generations are looking for decentralized leadership. So when you think about Black Lives Matter, right, and what that leadership structure looks like compared to mainstream Black-led organizations, very, very different. And if that is the generation that will lead and will fund, then I think it means that we are in models that are under pressure, not just for leadership structure, but I also think financially. The latest data coming out of the Lilly School said that religious giving is not going down. There's a real important paper. I'll send the link to Tiffany, and she might have already, to Professor Thomas. I'll send it to her, and she might have already shared. She might have already shared it with you, but it's like the 8 myths of philanthropy right now. And so one is that religious giving isn't going down. I don't feel that that is true just by my observation, but you can't trust this, right? We got to trust the data. But I think that all of our models for Black-led organizations, mainstream organizations, are under pressure. Because after my father, that generation that we've already talked about, transitions, and as Kelli says, goes into the light, you have a new generation of donors who are thinking very differently than that generation did. So I don't know how these models cannot be under pressure. So I think, to your point, Kevin, what you're seeing to me is indicative of what the future looks like if we don't change, and if we don't pivot, and if we don't innovate and evolve in the way that we lead, and the way that we expect funding to come, and the way that we give.
So the thing that I will add is, and if we don't value what we have, I think we have taken for granted some of these organizations that you're talking about, Kevin. And those organizations have models, development models, that assume quite a few things about how people give, both from a corporate side and a private philanthropy side. And we also do not invest in our own in many ways. And I'll say that in a real true belief in when you look around at organizations that have been around 25, 50, 100 years, and have chosen not to think about endowments, that speaks to not investing in yourself, not valuing what you have to offer, as well as a level of dependency that assumes quite a few things. And so that's a lot to unpack, but it's there.
Yeah. And I think it speaks to this notion that if we ever thought that someone was coming to save us, or if we ever thought that we were due that or owe that, if we are not clear about that now, that is not going to happen, to Nicole's point, I don't know that we ever will be. If this moment in history has not said to us that that moment is not coming, and that we must invest in ourselves and collectively come together in the ways that we did pre-integration, as she said, it's a lot to unpack, but it bears looking at what happens to people before they're fully free. Right? And if we don't go back to looking at some of those things, I think these are all models under great pressure.
Yeah.
I'll say this, and I'll let, for those of you that haven't had a chance to read Tinashe Coates' new book, The Water Dance, and I say read, I'm an Audible guy, so I audibled it. it actually goes into philanthropy in this sense, as far as Underground Railroad and funding that entire, the movie Harriet is out. And so it's ironic when you say we have had philanthropy. I never thought about it like this, but we've had philanthropy in our communities since the beginning of, since we got to the shores here.
1619, yes.
1619, right. And so reading that book reminded me, and what you're saying tonight reminds me that all of our major movements have been funded by those people of color and those people of non-color that are sympathetic to our cause, but not to have a foundation or endowment to be able to sustain. It's just painful to watch, because I can literally see, I'll say specific churches, I'm a PK as well, churches that were just bold and community development centered, and they are literally dying out. And it's just hard to watch that. So I'm off my soapbox. I'm used to talking. Ms. Tucker, you have any more questions? I'm sorry.
I do. Another one, in community philanthropy, who is the donor and who is the community? And are the roles and labels interchangeable?
In new models of philanthropy, they can be. So at my foundation, we have a living donor. So every year she puts a certain amount of money into the foundation and we give it away. Other foundations are living off of investments and endowments and will continue to make a lot of money to give a lot of money away. In Houston, we have a few collaboratives, if you will, that include funders and providers. And the providers serve in the role of grant makers. So they help review grants and make recommendations. And those models are relatively new, but I think are increasing here and across the country.
What I would add to that is I do think that these labels are interchangeable, and where you see strong community and strong organizations is when you see them interchange, right? When you see the after school program in neighborhood Y, where a parent might not be able to volunteer, but what they can do is do the flyers or create the website for it. So they might not be giving money, but they're giving their talent and time. So that investment in the work, so you are seen as not just a giver, a receiver of the services, but you are putting into as well.
And I would offer just a little different lens as always you think about careers and kind of what's next. Texas, unlike the East Coast where you have had legacy families that have passed on, so what you have are trust officers, as Kelly kind of mentioned a few minutes ago, people that are responsible for giving the money away from people who have transitioned from this life. And most often, I don't have the data in front of me, but they are not people of color. Most trust officers are not people of color. So the causes that come before those trust officers don't reflect the needs of communities that we might be most concerned about. So when you think about this bill, think really broadly, not just on the service side. I mean, we certainly need people on the nonprofit side, but we also need people on the trust and on the other side to be able to give money away and to bring those causes to people's attention. So on the East Coast and Eastern Seaboard, you have legacy families where this might be 4th or 5th generation or something has happened, but the money has been left in a state to a trust company and or to a private bank or some other kind of bank. And the people there then give that money away into community. And so those are other opportunities for folks to serve in philanthropy that are often overlooked roles because we typically only look at foundations as places where people can work.
Interesting. Okay, another question. Do you have recommendations for starting a business and a foundation at the same time?
Ooh, child. I do not. We don't. So oddly enough, I would say we don't really have a lot of Black-led foundations. So either whether that's family money, whatever the structure, we do have currently one that I know of, Black Giving Circle. And so another way that people do philanthropy and foundations is to set up donor advised funds. And so that would be you taking a certain amount of money and opening an account at the community foundation. So you don't have to do all the paperwork that's required to have your own foundation. And so you can do that individually if you've got that type of cash or assets, or you could also do that with a group. And so what's their name?
New Giving Collective?
New Giving Collective is a Black giving circle, and these are multiple individuals who came together and opened their fund at the community foundation to be able to give out money in the community. And I can drop the link.
And that was our other speaker tonight that was
yes.
dealing with whether Cassie Cook Provost is a part of the New Giving Collective. So.
And so is your professor. Your professor is one of the
yes.
founding members of New Giving Collective.
I don't think this question was race specific. I think it was just general.
And I would say, I would think social entrepreneurship, and maybe a term that's familiar to some but new to others. So I advise people that it doesn't have to be two separate things. We often think of giving and my charitable interest has to be separate from, but it can really be a part of. And so if you are building a business, think about the model of your business as one that, whether it's sustainable development goals, ESG, or you have some other mission or it's based on values, but how can my business also perhaps meet a need in the community and have both a profit, a bottom line that is positive, and accomplish a charitable mission? I would say if you were a small business owner, that doing that and then trying to start a foundation just would be a self-defeat. I don't want to say, but I have not known people in my experience to do both successfully, and that you would do better to try to build into your social purpose. Or as Kelli said, find the others, right? Go out and find people who share your interests, and together you all pool your resources and then do something together. But the notion that we all need a foundation, that we all need a thing, I think is misguided, because we can find other ways to give.
It's as misguided as I am passionate about an issue, and so therefore I must start a nonprofit. Because no one else is doing what I am passionate about in the way that I want to do it within the community or the population. I think if someone is starting a new business and thinking about their philanthropic self being reflected in that business, so not as starting a foundation as well, but how do you individually and from a business strategy incorporate in your giving? How is the giving that you are providing in your community, in the sector, within an issue, actually positively influencing your business success, right? So they shouldn't be thought of differently. They should definitely be integrated. And so if you own a car dealership, why are you giving to the Little League, right? You're giving to it because it's the community thing that people do, and those are your customers, and you want to make sure your brand is out there so folks think immediately of you for the new car? Or are you doing it just because you've always done it? And actually no one goes to the Little League games, and so your brand is actually not being elevated. And so maybe you need to think about, where else could I put those $2,000 instead of in a Little League and a uniform? But maybe I'm putting it somewhere else that is actually going to benefit my business and my brand, right? So I don't believe there is anything wrong with having, quadruple bottom lines, right? That I can do good and I can make money as well.
Okay. So do you feel that fundraising will become obsolete, and that as a society, we will migrate toward more advanced efforts of securing means to support local causes?
No.
No.
All righty. Okay.
There will always be those with and those without.
Mm-hmm.
It's the nature of a capitalistic system. So unless we went to some other model for the system in which we live, I can't see it.
Okay. I think I may have gone through all of my questions. I'm trying to.
No, that's fine. So while you're checking that, guys, anybody have any verbal questions for our panelists as we looks like we're headed towards the end of this. So if you have a question, feel free to unmute and ask our panelists what you may. We have a power-packed panelist, and it looks like we need to have another lecture series on the church, giving, and Black people. Some like that. It's not a good title, but we're gonna have something. We're gonna put something together like that because I want to get deeper without recording it. In what's going on. Anybody with questions, comments?
Okay, so I got a two.
Identify yourself, please.
This is Asada Thomas, Houston, Texas, I guess. But what I was gonna say is it's a couple of things that stood out to me that you guys were talking about. But as a young person who's trying to start, open up my own, community center, one of the most challenging things that I come across was finding board members. And the reason why I say that is because one of the first philanthropists that I met, they initially told me, they said, well, Sada, you have to think about what your community center looks like after you're gone, or what it's going to be when you're no longer, if you ever have to step down. So one of the most challenging things that I see is like when I'm trying to see who could be a board member, or I see who can I really entrust this gift that I feel like God placed in my heart to do, who can I really trust to actually follow through with this? Because often throughout college, throughout my undergrad years, when you meet people and you network with them, they always have alternative motives. Whether they want to use your 501c3 so they can do some, funny thing, or they only want to take pictures of feeding the homeless. They don't really care about what they're doing. So it's kind of, I guess for me, I'm trying to figure out how can you really distinguish someone who has a mutual passion opposed to someone who sounds good or looks good on paper, but they may not truly be well for someone who's trying to start something to really help the community. It looked like it's a lot because y'all staring at me.
No, I think they got muted for some reason. I don't know why everybody muted.
I mean, I will say that many small groups struggle to recruit board members because when you're a small organization, you have to be what we call a working board member, meaning they have to help fundraise, they have to help do the grants, they have to help take the pictures at the event. And we have over 30,000-ish registered nonprofits in Houston. So you also have competition for a volunteer pool to serve on your board. And so, I always tell people all the time, before you want to start a nonprofit, go talk to some nonprofits because sustaining the work is always the challenge. So I don't have an answer. I've been on small working boards. I actually hate board work, don't love it at all. And so I think the models of boards is 2 Robert's Rules of Order for me and probably for a lot of people in younger generations. So thinking about different ways of engaging in folks in the community to get the things done is probably going to be the boards of the future, in my opinion.
Okay. Can I speak to that even though I'm not on the panel? I get asked to be on boards all the time, and which is, I guess, a blessing as far as people with, but the boards, especially small organization boards, and especially, we're talking about Black boards, are working boards. I already have 2 jobs, Prairie View and commercial real estate, and so a lot of times, this is my opinion, I'll let the experts, as a person that gets asked a lot, I would rather sit down with you and assist you in either looking for other board members that maybe have more time, or assist you in your business plan, or where I'm highly yoked, than sit on a particular board. And so sometimes I think that's a better ask is, hey, can you help me, rather than be on a board, because I'm on enough working boards now at different levels of things. And so to me, asking for that guidance and that advice is a much better ask for someone like myself than actually being a board member.
Scott, I will say, and I was not being at all cavalier when I mentioned earlier that I am an extremely strong advocate for no new nonprofits in any community I've ever lived in. But the advice that I would say, how I would respond to your question is, I agree that working boards are extremely difficult for many people because they're either busy or for any number of reasons. I think it's important to be really clear what you expect of a board member and what you are providing that board member as far as resources are concerned. Are you providing them with training as it relates to the policies within your organization? Or are you providing them with the support necessary for them to raise money for your organization? So there is a series of tasks and resources as you're thinking about building a board for a new organization. There are also, the final thing I'll say is there are many Houston actually does not have a large sector of individuals that provide capacity to nonprofits in the space of development or board development. But the ones that we do have, there is a, how am I saying this? Oh, you don't look at me like that. So we do have a few that have a long legacy in the nonprofit community that, in my opinion, have significant dollar amounts without the equivalent of results. So so I just put that out there because you might, as a new organization, be tempted to hire that capacity building piece of it, that board development piece. And if you do, make sure you know what you're getting and the value for that bill.
That was a very nice way to put that, Necole. The way you surfed through that was awesome. The nonverbal was great as well.
So she's saying, don't you go pay anybody.
Exactly.
I'm gonna play Kelli now. Now, don't you go pay nobody. We're gonna switch our roles. It's the end. But honestly, Asada, just to echo what they said, if you don't have to do it, and I know this sounds, especially for this class, don't start the nonprofit. If there is a way to meet the needs of that population by partnering with someone, by building out a bigger program for something that already exists, by referring them, by doing some kind of collective, by working in community with groups, any other way, and be sure you've exhausted all of those other avenues before you start, if you haven't already. Now, if you're on the path, you're on the path, but if you haven't done it, I would just encourage you to do it. Having sat on that side for 20 plus years, raising money, doing a capacity building, doing it without folks, it's a task that people cannot even begin to measure sometimes what it takes to be successful. So, right. And so, as you already know, if there is another way to meet the needs of that population, go that route first, would be my encouragement.
All right. Any other questions?
I put the link to that 8 articles myth in the.
I was just about to. For those of you that are on the call or on the in Zoom, LaTanya and Kelli and Necole have been posting different links to. I'm going to try to save this chat and send it out, but some of the links that they posted are to the announcement of the church body at Trinity United Methodist. For those of you not familiar with Trinity United Methodist, that's where Jeremiah Wright was pastor. Obama went to school, went to church until she starts laughing. But so
So
that's
you should have told me you were a houseman. That's where, there we go. All right.
yeah, exactly. So, and Otis Moss II is a bad man too. That's a whole nother conversation as far as Ohio is concerned. But with that being said, she has the link to that article that the church paid off the medical debt, which was just an awesome example talking about public philanthropy. And then I think I see a link here for the Home Coalition for Work Around Equitable Disaster Recovery. I think that was Dr. Easley and Chris's question. And then LaTanya posted the 8 myths article that she referenced. So I'm going to try to figure out how to save this chat and send it to everyone. So I guess to wrap up, if no one asks questions, I just would ask each of you this final question. For those of our students, I should say, that want to get into possibly philanthropy and or nonprofit work as a career option, and what advice would you give them? This is a graduate program. Our graduate students run the gamut as far as what they do. There's no specific undergraduate degree that is required to be in our program, which is an awesome thing because we get a variety and diversity of thought. But with that being said, you know, and if it's not, because I saw Necole drink wine when I asked the question, if it's not to do that, I believe, this is my personal belief, that we need as many people in the capitalistic society that's giving as we do that's working. And so that's where I really do believe that my calling is to make money, not only for my family, but to be able to give. So I've chosen that side of the fence other than Prairie View. But we do have students that are interested in pursuing careers in one way, shape, or another within this general space. So I just would ask any advice, career or life advice, as our final question.
So I'll say a couple things. One, locally, I always send everyone to United Way Job Board. They have probably the most comprehensive. Houston is starting to engage with headhunters more, but I'm not as familiar with that space, so that may be a Google search. But we do have some nonprofit focused headhunters. There are some, Koya Partners is one that has a really good equity lens, KOYA. The other thing I would say is utilize LinkedIn. Start to really, I'm a big fan of socials and using socials for social good. And so thinking about what is your giving brand? What stories are you elevating? What stories are you telling? What articles are you sharing? What conversations are you contributing to online? The ways that we network are changing and evolving. I think that any group that you're a part of, if there's a mechanism for you to start modeling and practicing giving, whether that's a sorority or fraternity, your faith group, your social club, really starting to ask good questions and really show your expertise even amongst those spaces, because there are a lot of people who are part of those groups who are involved in the sector. I think the last thing I'd say is don't forget about corporate and government philanthropy. So in Houston, we work a lot with private companies who have foundations, and so that is a path. In addition to government departments who are giving out and re-granting federal money that comes into our community. And all of those positions, I'm thinking like a lot of them are nearing that retirement-ish age, right? And so getting in there now so you can get the training and the experience so that as those leaders transition out to retirement, they've already built a pipeline of succession.
It's great.
Mm-hmm. I would say that I think it's really important if you're thinking, as you think about a career trajectory, as I'm closer to 50 than not, right? And I've lived a life where I've had a variety and a real diversity of career experiences. I think there is value in thinking about the why and for what purpose. And really delving into how it connects with who you are, who your true self is. And so I mentioned earlier, this foundational component for me was the origin of my birthplace and my family's connection. And as I really began to unpack that, I see it reflected in all of the jobs that I've had. And I see it reflected in my future space of revenue and giving. So I say, you know, do some self-reflecting on the for what purpose and the why.
Ditto what my colleagues said, and I think what I said earlier about what, I think someone had the question about what would you have told your younger self. And I think also just reading, so Stanford Social Innovation Review, subscribing to things, if you're interested in equity and justice, like Neighborhood Funders, Rockwood, NCRP, some of the leaders in the space, so you can get a sense of what people are thinking and how conversations are being shaped, so that when you go to engage, you bring value to the conversation, but that you also understand if a conversation is missing a whole part of a conversation. And so I think beginning to read across the sector, there's some great publications out there. And I use my Twitter feed for that. My Twitter is not active, but I use Twitter to really inform myself in philanthropy. So I follow certain folks. And so how you leverage social media, other than, you know, memes and emojis and cat videos, I don't know. I just got on 2 years ago, so it's all new to me. But how you use Twitter, and that's really what I've done, is curated a feed for me. And when I go on Twitter, in a solid hour, I am smarter because I have gone, seriously. And I can even do it in 15 or 30 minutes. So think about how you can use that. We talked about your network. I did not build early on in very wise ways. So how you begin to do that. And to remember, I know this goes without saying, but Houston is a real big, small town. And so these people that you meet in private philanthropy, as Kelli said, corporate and government, it's just not a huge circle and a huge network. So not to burn your bridges, and then to work across those to be able to build your network for future. And as Necole said, to know your why. I really set, when I thought about launching my practice, and ask myself, what were my core values? Even though I had them here, but to really write them down and to wrestle with them. What are the 5 things, Tanya, that mean the most to you? And so that even if the space does not look like what you thought it would, can you hold on to what is most important to you and bring value and to use your power? And can you influence in this space? And if you can do that and hold on to your values, you might have opportunities that you never dreamed of. And so to really be open to that as well, that it may not look like what you think, but if you can exercise power and influence for what you value most, it might be an opportunity for you.
So I had another question that came up, but we're going to end on that because I feel like I should pass the collection plates twice, for missions and the second for tithes and offerings, because the way Tanya ended that was just awesome. I will say this, you know what, I'm going to go ahead and ask it. A lot of times, because of what I do, I'm the only one that looks like me, literally the only one that looks like me in commercial real estate spaces. And you guys mentioned at the very beginning, especially Tanya, about your network. And so what I've noticed is my level of confidence about myself and my abilities is in direct proportion to how I feel inside those rooms. And that level of confidence has increased over time as I've become more, not only technically competent, but knowing who I am, my why. And so I'll ask this one last question. A lot of times our students think because of an assumed minority status, either woman or African-American or whatever background, whatever makes them quote unquote different, that they cannot survive and build networks that allow for them to, outside of our own communities or outside of their own friend groups. And so I promise this will be the last question. It's just piqued my interest. How did you guys develop your networks outside of in the giving community that doesn't look like us, and especially in high net worth situations, have the confidence or develop the confidence? And if you had it from the beginning, that's fine. But I'm just curious because I know our students sometimes feel like, well, I can't go into these rooms where I'm not represented economically or racially and ask for money. I don't know, what I would do. So I'm just curious as to maybe a quick answer, if that's a quick answer to that question. Or drink of water.
For me, it was seeing how white folks got jobs, right? So when I watch people of color try to apply for jobs and the hoops that we jump through, and when I see, oh, John gave Jane a job. What? What you mean John gave Jane a job? How that work? Right? And so I started really like better understanding it wasn't that Jane was smarter, right? It was that John gave Jane a job. And so helping people of color understand like your network, you're build that with intentionality. Amen. Right? And put yourself in spaces and lean into your education because you're often going to be overqualified, right? And so shoot your shot. Shoot your shot. Apply for everything, right? You know, people kind of in our set in my network will say, if I was a white man, I would apply for that job. But as a Black woman, when I read that job description, I'm like, oh, I don't have all those things, right? So shoot your shot. If it's something you want to go after it. Try it. Like we won't try to crush your dreams inside it. Do you, right? Like I think that it is important for us to be able to risk take and to put ourselves out there. And we all grow into that confidence. My daughter has it unlike I had at her age, so I'm hoping that generationally, like it gets better. But I think that I know I bring my expertise, I bring my experience, and I'm not gonna be silent in the rooms that I have access to because I am privileged to be in those spaces. Necole could talk to you all day about Black privilege. I didn't know I had it. I know I got it now, and I learned how to use it for the betterment of my community.
Anybody else?
I that was well said. I think the only I should stop saying I think the only thing. Multiple things. Sorry about that. I agree that you should go for it. I'll give you a really short example. There have been many times that I have, as a funder, sitting at a funder's table, I've had an organization who does quality work. And they will say to me, I have not applied for money from you because all my ducks are not in a row. I don't have everything yet where I want it to be. And I've had others who have come to me with just an idea. No kinds of impact, no kinds of data, no spreadsheets. And they say, give me $2 million because I'm asking. And I will say that depending upon whose dollars they are, that person could get the $2 million, right? With an idea. And yet the person who is doing the work is still trying to get their stuff together before they ask. And I would say, what does it fault you to ask? Right? You will, if you're not knocking, that door is not going to open.
Closed mouths don't get fed.
Hello, we can go on and on with our our rich legacy, right, of knowledge in our community.
Yeah, and I would say preparation is a great antidote to fear, but I also say fear is a privilege. And I just feel like as a woman of color in this is South enough, that fear is just a luxury I can't afford sometimes, right? Because if I am driven by that, there's some things, as Necole said, I'm not going to ask for, I'm not going to show up for. And a friend sent me, she said, Tanya, you're one of the most prepared people I know. Here was my response. You think so? Like, it just, when does it stop? Like, when do you just say enough is enough? And I'm not talking about just wake up and be great one day, but prepare, do what you need to do, and then make your move, right? Because as Kelli said, and I know the rest of the quote she was saying, but people of mediocre disposition and skill and talent ask for far grander things than we do on our most prepared day, right? And so sometimes I have coached people to get in your mirror, whether it is that conversation that you have with yourself, like just some practical things you can do, right? Prepare your speech before you go, get a buddy, use your phone to tape yourself and listen back, whatever the helps are you need to reduce the fear, right? But do not let fear, and we're not talking about perfection, but to be prepared and to go ask and make your move. Because on other folks' most mediocre day, they ask for things that we don't on our most prepared day.
All right.
And they get it.
And they get it, right, exactly. That's one of the changing parts of my professional career is when I realized that last statement. All right, ladies, any last words to our students here? We're gonna go ahead and wrap it up, but I asked you 2 last questions, but y'all have anything that you want to say before we jump off?
Thank you.
Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you. And thank you for the thoughtful questions. Thank you.
Yeah.
I appreciate you guys. Professor Thomas, Tiffany D. Thomas, excuse me. Appreciate you. I've been texting with her. She could not log on. She's with her volunteers. We're going to, as my grandmother would say, send up some timber for her tomorrow that will come out to the polls, and she has a eventful and successful day tomorrow. I want to personally thank you on behalf of our community development program, the School of Architecture at Prairie View. This is a goal of ours, is to connect our students with actual practitioners. And we used to do a really good job of that. We kind of fell off a little bit. And so this semester, you guys are our second lecture series. One was face-to-face, this one's virtual. And so I want to thank you for taking out these couple of hours to talk to our students and be a resource and honestly be motivational. I'm sitting up straight at the end just because of the information that you guys have provided. So I just want to give you guys a hand clap of praise for being with us tonight. And we really, really appreciate peace and blessings to all of you. And we look forward to hopefully inviting you out so we can meet you physically and see some of the work our students are doing.
Thank y'all.
Thank
you so much.
Have a good night.
Don't forget to vote.
Have a good night.
And Kevin, I sent you instructions on how to save the chat because
Yes,
Kelli just gave y'all a phenomenal list of not every resource, but some of the best resources Kelli just posted. So
I saw both of those, and I'm gonna end with this. Kelli type, shoot your shot, y'all. And on that, good night.
Good night.
Bye, friends.
Bye-bye.